We'll start with the session about profiling the profiles. And just like you probably know by now, if you have any questions, please wait until the end. We have 5 minutes for the questions, but raise your hand so I can walk to you. Good. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Is my good? Okay. Today I'm going to talk about FHIR profiling of profiles, bridging theory and practice in Canadian implementations. Myself, I'm Raman. I'm associating with Dogwood and FHIRly. In terms of job title, I'm a FHIR SME and a FHIR trainer. Before I even start on the profiling concept, does everyone know what do you mean by a FHIR profile here? Okay, I think that's why you guys are here in this room. So that's good. Do we know what do you mean by profiling of profiles? So in simpler language, parent-child hierarchy, are we aware of that concept? Okay, I do see a couple of hands there, but just to clarify, profiling a profile means you can see something like that on the screen where we have, let's say, national foundational standards, Australian core, US core, Canadian core, right? So that's act as a reusable structure for your nation. And then in your provinces or in your states there, you can actually extend or put further constraints on top of your national standards, right? So that's your provincial standard. And it's also possible that you might need regional specific constraints on top of that as well, right? So you'll have regional use cases or other constraints on top of provincial standards. So this derivation tree, this is happening with the base derivation, using base derivation element in the structure definition. So it's basically parent-child hierarchy, which we call as profiling of profile concept. But does this really work in real world? I'm going to talk about from the Canadian landscape perspective, how are we seeing this being implemented? But before I dive deeper into that, I want to just clarify some of the concepts here, or how do I say terminology related to that. So we talked about derivation, which is profiling of profiles. You might have heard like I'm aligned to the specification, right? So alignment would be something as you have the same modeling principles, but without technical linkage, right? So there's no parent-child relationship. There's no technical linkage there, but we're calling it as aligned. So our IG publisher, our simplifier, they detect derivation, but not alignment. From technical perspective, FHIR does not support multiple inheritance, right? So that's not legal in FHIR. But FHIR does provide you some of these concepts like complies with profile, impose profile, and so on, right? So when I say complies with profile, this means that this profile already conforms to another profile, even though it's not formally driven from it. So basically, I'm saying I'm already compliant to this one. If you want to be conformant with myself, you really don't have to comply with this other profile. Then I have impose profile. This is basically, if you use this profile, you must follow the rules from another profile. So to be conformant, you need to be conformant with this profile and this another profile as well. So these are some of the concepts we're going to talk about today. But coming to what do we see? Like, what is the current state and hierarchy of the standards from Canadian perspective? Right. So you see all of these different layers. So obviously, we have our base FHIR spec here. We have international layer where we have IHG Care Service Directory. We have international patient summary. We have IPA and we have US core. And then we have national core where we have Care Service Directory specification, which is formally driven from the international specification. We have Canadian Patient Summary, which is not technically driven from IPS, but it's basically aligned with IPS. We have Canadian Referral Spec, which is based on the FHIR standard here. We have CA Core, which is built with CA CDI, based on like Canadian core data for interoperability, but it still references US core. And then obviously we do have all of these mixes in the provincial layer as well, right? So we have provincial patient summary spec, we have provincial e-referral spec, and the provincial core standard. So what you see here is a mix of lineage, right? So we have a mix of derivation, we have a mix of alignment, so it's basically so confusing for vendors at this point, right? What do we really implement, right? And how does this hierarchy works, this alignment versus all of these different things? So from vendors' perspective, what is actually happening on the ground? So profile proliferation, right? So we have like different profiles, different specifications. Vendors are so confused at this point. What do we really implement? Jurisdictions are working at different paces and levels. Vendors are overwhelmed by the number of specs, and it's basically confusing, like where should we start implementing these specs? So what are we hearing from implementers here? What profiles do I really need to support, right? Do I follow national one or do I follow provincial one? And sometimes provincial ones are way ahead of the national ones in the game, right? So in that sense, vendors have already implemented our provincial spec. And at that point, they're thinking, do I do the national implementation or the provincial implementation? What if the provincial profile breaks other use cases? It's hard to know what profile is in scope. Some of the other challenges and trade-offs that we're seeing here is basically there is this misaligned expectation as well, right? So there are these differences between national versus provincial priorities. There is this complicated profile inheritance chains, right? So you see there's this additional complexity that comes with the chaining concept as well. So we are seeing that. There is this duplicate work where there is a multiple version of the same concept. So we have identified data type profiles that is being modeled in the different specifications different ways, right? So there's a subtle difference there. And from testing perspective, one vendor is thinking, how do I test with this particular profile, right? So if they have these different versions of the profile, so it's so confusing for the vendors out there from testing perspective as well. So this is purely from the provincial layer that has been working for us so far is we're trying to avoid multiple layering. So when I say that, we are only doing layering when it's absolutely needed and if it's driven from provincial policy or interoperability requirements. As I said, it basically obscures the origin of constraints. It's really hard to do validations and conformance testing when there are these multiple layers involved. And if you need layering, there should be clear layering documentation. You need to tell in your specification that this is your parent specification, this is your child, right? And this is how I'm different from the parent spec. Other thing that I've realized is I think it's really useful that we need to work with real vendors and solution architects to ensure that they understand how do you read a profile, how do you read a FHIR specification, right? I feel at this point there's lack of clarity there, and we need to ensure that our implementers does understand what we're creating from standards perspective as well. We've started identifying what are our common constraints versus the use case specific ones. So this is really working. And profile governance. This one is a bit of a challenge. We have started making this governance like a centralized body from jurisdictional perspective so that we know what constraints are needed in the province and meet specification according to that. So there's a bit of a work in progress on this one, but I feel like there's a combination of if we can have a layering discipline, if we can have stakeholder or vendor engagement and a strong governance, this might work. What can further help is if we can identify similar use case across jurisdictions and make it a national guide. This is already happening in Canada, but even from the provincial perspective, we need to ensure that we all are doing that in sync. Other thing is profile hierarchy or alignment metadata, right? So we already talked about impose profile or complies with profile, and obviously derivation concept, right? So we need to start understanding these concepts and start implementing it. And also we need to start documentation as well, right? So we need to ensure that we are reflecting that all in the profile, but we also need to reflect that in the specification as well. Visualization tools for derivation and alignment paths. This one, if we think about impose profile and complies with profile, the visualization exists currently in IG Publisher, but not in Simplifier yet. But we don't have a visualization, a better visualization to envision this is a parent, this is a child, this is a grandchild, right? So that doesn't exist yet. So I feel like we can do better there. And a vendor onboarding package. I feel like this one will be really useful. We need to tell our implementers, vendors, how do you read a profile, implementation guide, how do you, like what to implement versus what's informative, right? This is the business content, and this is what you're implementing. It's not just differential view, but this is the snapshot view you're looking at, right? So some of the teachings around that. And that's all.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Hello. I'm from Germany, and we have encountered very similar problems with layering profiles. And one problem in particular that I realized is that when you have layered profiles, the higher up in the hierarchy you are, the more abstract the profile is. So quite often, the top level profiles are never being implemented, but implementers instead implement profiles that are much further down the hierarchy, which often causes errors in specifications to only pop up when derived profiles are being implemented. And depending on the responsibilities for the different profiles, fixing that error can take a long time, because first the organization down here has to talk to the other organization at the top and ask them to fix the bug, release a new package, then they have to update their dependency, also release a new package, and depending on how many steps or layers you have, fixing a simple bug can take forever. It can take months to get it fixed, which is why I usually recommend people to avoid deriving profiles unless you can basically yell across the hallway to get someone to fix the error in the upper profile. Meaning, if it's the same organization that manages both the parent and the child, it's probably okay. But if these are different jurisdictions, I find that highly problematic that bug fixes are so complicated to get by.
Exactly, and I think that's the same problem in Canada as well, right? So how do you ensure that there's proper feedback loop and everybody is on the same page? There's a governance to do that, right? And does it fit with the timelines as well? So yeah, thank you.
Hi, Casey from Epic. I totally understand all of those frustrations as someone who has had to implement that and bubble up things to a body that I don't have control of. But I will say that on the same side, having a separate standard that fixes it there and doesn't address the core issue by getting it to the higher level standard allows the problem to be there, and then it doesn't get surfaced and it kind of kicks it down to then it comes time to implement the standards. And now we've also got two different versions that need to be implemented depending on the jurisdiction. So as much as possible, I want to encourage everyone to take on the challenge as soon as we find it and point it out and give that feedback and bubble it up so that hopefully, we can as much as possible align on reusable standards that everyone can use to talk to each other.
Yeah, I guess that's the ideal state, right? But as you know, we have always issues with this, and I have seen jurisdictions creating their own specs because of this, because national and international specs won't change, and those timelines won't fit in their timelines, right? So it's a bit of a challenge.
Any more? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. You spoke a lot about inheritance of profiles. Do you have any comments or thoughts about profiles that are at the same level? So, for example, in Canada, there's CA IPS and provincial IPS, and all the provincial IPSs have conflicting requirements.
Yeah.
Right. So, is there thoughts, guidance, anything that? What do you think about that
I
problem?
guess that's the main cause I wanted to do this talk. I call it a silent fragmentation, as you said, right? If we think from provincial perspective, one province is building on top of FHIR, base FHIR, aligned with IPS though. One province is leveraging Canadian patient summary as is, and the other one is deriving from patient summary. So in a way, I would call it as a silent fragmentation. Everybody thinks they're compliant, but everyone is doing their own thing, and bit of a slightly subtle, with a subtle difference, right? How do we navigate this challenge? I really don't know. But yeah, we have seen that happening. And the thing is, in their own profile derivation path, they're not aware what's happening in the other derivation profile path, right? So they're not aware of each other. And this difference can go a long way, right? And that it can cause pain to implementers because they might be just implementing this path and not sure what's happening in Alberta or British Columbia or Ontario, and right? So yeah, no good answer for you. Yeah, but it's a pain.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing some of the feedback around how do you apply, a national spec across multiple provinces. And you're right, we have a national patient summary, but it's being done slightly differently in British Columbia versus slightly differently in New Brunswick, even though they use directly, not even deriving, just directly use the PSCA, but one of them, just because of the way the practices work and the fact that each province manages their own healthcare system, that drives a lot of differences. So that's definitely a challenge. I wonder if there are folks that are interested, maybe a birds of a feather, of doing around national cores or national standards, because I'd like to hear a lot of what other countries are dealing with their issues.
Yeah. Any other person want to share what's happening? How are they dealing with this issue?
Sorry, and I'm Canadian.
Okay.
I have to. I'm Canadian.
I think it's all Canadians.
It always starts with an apology. This is a problem in clinical in Canada, but it's not a problem in the financial exchanges in Canada. So, if you will, the pharmacy claims across the country is one standard because all the people got together. So interoperability fundamentally, I believe, is not a technology problem. And you're not going to solve it with technology alone.
Yeah.
It's actually a people problem. And so our problem here is that we have different jurisdictions who feel comfortable creating non-interoperable solutions, right? And you can band-aid this all you want with technology, it's not going to get there. However, if you walk into a dental office, they send the claim to an insurance company on the other side of the country, it's exactly the same format and the same standard. Because nationally, the providers and the payers have gotten together and agreed to do the same thing. So you can't have interoperable standards if you don't have interoperable business.
Definitely.
Sorry? You can extend it, but what you don't have is people agreeing to do the same thing. You're talking about mechanisms that allow people to do different things, and that's the definition of not interoperable.
or different versions of it, right? Yeah, doing it a bit differently.
So really what you need to do is get people to agree to do the same thing, and then your problem would disappear. You will still want to be doing layering of abstract to implementable profiles, etc. So the technology is not the issue here so much as the fact that different jurisdictions feel comfortable taking a specification home and making it their own and not interoperable.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's time. But the session that follows is about profiles in a Dutch landscape. So if you're interested in this, it's in the same room. Thank you.
Thank you.